Hello literature students, and thank you for having a look at this video, which is designed to be a very quick plot summary of the main events that happen in Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet. And as I said in the last in this sequence, I've deliberately not included any real deep language analysis here because I'll deal more thoroughly with that in key speeches in another set of lessons. Although as I go through, you'll see that I do pick out some key quotations which will be worth noting down. So Act 2, Scene 1 begins with a chorus, which is basically a commentary on the action that's already passed. But, you know, in all honesty, in all of the performances that I've ever seen of this play, this speech has never been performed, and so I really wouldn't worry too much about it. You need to imagine that at the start of this act, Romeo and the other Montague boys are leaving the Capulet ball, and Romeo has run off trying to find a way back into the Capulet grounds so that he can speak again to Juliet. Benvolio clarifies this for the audience when he says, "He ran this way and leapt this orchard wall. Call, good Mercutio." Mercutio responds in typical playful tone, assuming that he has run off in pursuit of Rosaline, unaware that Romeo has in fact fallen for Juliet. And in the end his friends leave, saying, "Go then, for 'tis vain to seek him here that means not to be found." Scene 2 is, without question, one of the most important in the play and probably one of the most iconic in the whole of English literature. Romeo has climbed the garden wall to the Capulet mansion and has progressed through the orchard to the house. He hides in the trees and he sees a light come on in one of the upstairs bedrooms and soon after sees Juliet appear at her balcony. Now, if you remember from the video on Act 1, there are a number of images of light in the first part of the play. And when Romeo sees this, he says, "What light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun," comparing Juliet with the rising sun and all the promise of a new day and the life and warmth that it brings. Now, there is a lot more to say about this speech, but as I said at the beginning, the purpose here is summary, and so I'll return to this in a later video. From his hidden position in the garden, he hears Juliet say, "Ay me," which is a sort of sigh, perhaps of love or conflict between her newfound adoration of Romeo and family loyalty. In another image of light, Romeo compares her to a bright angel before Juliet utters the famous line, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" which has been misinterpreted pretty regularly as meaning, "Where are you, Romeo?" while the true meaning is, "Why are you called Romeo?" She's saying, why, of all the names, did you have to be called Romeo, as this is the only name that will ensure they are kept apart by their feuding families. When Romeo makes himself known to Juliet, as she is considering this question, she is shocked, but recognises his voice and asks how he got there. Romeo then makes further comparisons to angels, and probably Cupid in particular, when he says, "With love's light wings did I o'erperch these walls, for stony limits cannot hold love out." He too recognises the problem of their identities, but demonstrates his love for Juliet in the lines, "I know not how to tell thee who I am. My name, dear saint, is hateful to myself because it is an enemy to thee." And over the next lines, Romeo and Juliet exchange promises of love. Romeo saying he would rather die than be without Juliet, and Juliet saying that Romeo is now the god of my idolatry. But Juliet shows that she's not as naive as one might suppose, being only 13 years old. She knows that men will make bold professions of love which turn out to be lies. She says, "Dost thou love me? I know thou wilt say aye, and I will take thee at thy word, yet if thou swearest, thou mayst prove false." But Romeo promises and swears that his love is genuine, and before the scene is over, they've agreed to get married. Juliet will send a messenger, who will be the nurse, to Romeo at 9 o'clock the following morning, by which point Romeo will need to get the ceremony organised. The person that Romeo goes to in order to do this is somebody called Friar Laurence, who, much like the nurse, will play a pivotal role in counselling the two young lovers and passing messengers. messengers. At the beginning of this scene, we see Friar Laurence, probably in a garden, collecting herbs and flowers in a basket. And this is actually a really important detail for later in the play, when the friar uses his knowledge of plants to create a potion which he hopes will reunite the separated lovers. When Romeo arrives, he explains that he's not slept, and the friar is shocked that he might have been with Rosaline. When Romeo tells him that in fact he's been feasting with mine enemy, and furthermore that my heart's dear love is set on the fair daughter of rich Capulet, and basically that he wants the friar to agree to marry them today. At first, the friar is shocked, saying, "Holy St. Francis, what a change is here! Is Rosaline that thou didst love so dear so soon forsaken?" But he soon recognises the potential in the situation, and that by marrying them, he might actually be able to stop the ongoing feud between the families of Montague and Capulet. He says, "For this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancour to pure love." And so, despite the chaos which follows, it's clear that the friar agrees to marry the young lovers with the noble intention of stopping once and for all the brawls in Verona. Act 2, Scene 4 is a relatively long scene with just really a couple of key points to pick up on. Remember that we are now at the morning after the party, and Romeo's friends are still wondering what's happened to him the night before after he ran off. Benvolio confirms that he's spoken to one of the Montague servants and that Romeo has not been home. What Benvolio was also able to find out is that Tybalt has sent a message to Romeo's house, and Mercutio thinks he knows that the message is a challenge on my life. In other words, I bet it is a challenge to a duel. They then get into a discussion about Tybalt, which is important in establishing that Tybalt is one of the best swordsmen in the whole of Verona, and question whether Romeo should accept the challenge. When Romeo arrives in the scene, Mercutio appears at first cross with him for giving them the slip last night. Romeo apologises, saying that his business was great, and it isn't long before the friends are reconciled and they exchange some witty and quite rude jokes, which I suppose is typical of a group of young lads hanging out. Mercutio is pleased by the change in the mood of Romeo, saying, "Why, is this not better than groaning for love? Now art thou sociable, now art thou Romeo." Romeo, by the way, hasn't told them about his new love, Juliet. Then the nurse arrives, as organised, from Juliet. And after Mercutio has teased her with some fairly bawdy humour, both he and Benvolio leave and Romeo talks to the nurse alone. The nurse initially warns Romeo that he'd better not be playing around with Juliet, because Juliet is young and it would be a very mean thing to do. Romeo reassures her with the following message to Juliet. "Bid her devise some means to come to Shrift this afternoon, and there she shall, at Friar Laurence's cell, be shrived and married." Shrift, by the way, is confession. So Romeo is saying that Juliet needs to come up with some reason for needing to go to confession that afternoon, and then they will be married. The next scene is one which really only serves to move the plot along a bit, allows for some time to pass in terms of the nurse returning to Juliet, and then the important bit of the nurse giving Juliet Romeo's message. It's a comedic scene, with the nurse knowing that she's got good news to give to Juliet and deliberately delaying giving it to her, and the young Juliet getting increasingly frustrated and impatient. And I put an example here, Juliet saying, "What says he of our marriage? What of that?" And the nurse replying, "Lord, how my head aches. What a head have I. It beats as it would fall in 20 pieces. But eventually the nurse relents and asks Juliet, "Have you got leave to go to Shrift today?" And Juliet replies, "I have." And the nurse says, "Then hie you hence to Friar Laurence's cell. There stays a husband to make you a wife." Act 2, Scene 6 is pretty short, and the only thing of importance here is that this is the scene where Romeo and Juliet actually get married, just a few hours after having first met at the Capulet ball. Perhaps the most significant line in this scene is spoken by the friar to Romeo before Juliet arrives for the ceremony. He says, "These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder." Now remember that the friar said that he would agree to marry Romeo and Juliet as a way of perhaps bringing the warring families together in some sort of reconciliation. And here he appears to be suggesting that bringing them together in this way will have the same impact as bringing together fire and gunpowder. There will be an explosion, and that explosion will happen right at the beginning of Act 3.